Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Mavidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace and beneficence be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So good evening, everyone. Namaste. Welcome to our Wednesday evening reading and discussion of Swami Ranganathananda's book, Divine Grace. We're well along in the book. I'm sure Swayam will be, our reader will be happy to tell us where we are, and then we'll begin.
Good evening, everybody. And we are on page 66, which I also got it confirmed from Haima because my page marker had fallen off. But I will start from the top of page 66, although I think we did that first paragraph last time. Shall I begin?
Yes, please.
Okay. Spontaneity through non-effort appears where the self is thus surrendered to something higher than itself, where the small self, has emancipated itself from the stagnation of its sensate tether. It finds expression not only in sainthood, but also in some aesthetic achievements and some discoveries of scientific truths in the physical sciences, and generally in all creative insights beyond and above all intellectual and logical knowledge. In all such achievements and experiences, the intellectual effort and struggle, though indispensable for the onset of the insight, feel baffled by the
Beverly, mute yourself, please. Beverly, mute yourself, please.
Sorry.
For the onset of the insight.
For the onset of the insight, feel baffled by the problem in front and retreats from the scene. When the truth quietly walks into the conscious mind, as it were, from the depths of consciousness. I'm going to read that sentence again. It was a long sentence.
Please do, dear.
In all such achievements and experiences, the intellectual effort and struggle, though indispensable for the onset of the insight, feel baffled by the problem in front and retreat from the scene. When the truth quietly walks into the conscious mind, as it were, from the depths of consciousness. There is thus a spiritual kinship between Vedantic teachings about divine grace and all the philosophies of creativity and non-effort. In the words of Professor Fridtjof Capra in his Tao of Physics, rational knowledge and rational activities certainly constitute the major part of scientific research, but are not all there is to it. The rational part of research would, in fact, be useless if it were not complemented by the intuition that gives scientists new insights and makes them creative. These insights tend to come suddenly and characteristically not when sitting at a desk working out the equations, but when relaxing in the bath, during a walk in the woods, on the beach, etc. During these periods of relaxation, after concentrated intellectual activity, the intuitive mind seems to take over and can produce the sudden clarifying insights which give so much joy and delight to scientific research. In all intuition, the conscious self and the rational consciousness surrender themselves to something deeper than themselves. Only then does spontaneity manifest itself, bringing with it the other invaluable instrument of creativity, not only for the discovery of new scientific truths, but also for happy and rich interhuman relationships, namely imagination. In his lecture on Recollections of Lord Rutherford at Royal Science Society, London, on 17th May 1966, physicist P.L. Kapitza, eulogizing the intuition and imagination that enriched that great physicist, said, "In the history of the development of physics, as in any other experimental science, the most interesting periods are those in which we are brought to revise our fundamental scientific conceptions. Then, not only deep thinking and intuition are required from the scientist, but also a daring imagination." Then, after mentioning the names of Benjamin Franklin and Michael Faraday as belonging to this category, Kapitza continues, I mention these two well-known cases only to show that at a particular stage of the development of science, when new fundamental concepts have to be found, wide erudition and conventional training are not the most important characteristics of a scientist required to solve this kind of problem. It appears that in this case, imagination, very concrete thinking, and most of all, daring are needed. Strict logical thinking, which is so necessary in mathematics, hinders the imagination of a scientist when new fundamental concepts must be found. The ability of a scientist to solve such scientific problems without showing a logical trend of thought is usually called intuition. Possibly there is a way of thinking which takes place in our subconscious, but the laws by which it is governed are at present unknown. That's the end of section 21.
Now, we're at just such a juncture in a number of sciences: microbiology, neuroanatomy, and astrophysics, just to mention three. All of these have come to a position where what they've found through research has called into question the assumptions and the hypotheses on which they've been operating on. The James Webb Telescope, for example, has for astrophysicists completely upended their model, the model of the universe from which they've been operating. So exactly what has been described here by the Swami and by those he's quoting will be necessary in all of these three sciences. There's also strong reason to believe that we must come to some new understandings, new insights, profound new insights about how human beings get along with one another for us to resolve this terrible divide. And I do mean terrible divide that is really tearing at the fabric of our social construct here in this country and around the world. So new insights will be required. And I think now the Swami is going to tell us where he thinks, particularly in the spiritual realm, those new insights will come from. But before we go on, any comments from your own wisdom or experience, or any concern or question that any of what's been read raises for you?
Swami, so isn't this Swami is mainly concentrating intuitive aspect of our consciousness? That is what actually in the last sentence he says, the ability of a scientist to solve such scientific problems without showing a logical trend of thought is usually called intuition. And also in the beginning of in the 66th page, in the beginning of the last para, it said, in all intuition, the conscious self and the rational consciousness surrender themselves to something deeper than themselves.
Yes, this is exactly what he's driving at. This is what he's saying, that this is divine grace. This breakthrough thinking, this intuition. It is divine grace that at work. And then all of this logical and rational aspect has to be applied. Einstein was very clear that his insight that led to the equation E equals mc squared, which is an equation that means energy and matter are the same in two different states. But he had to be able to then express that in a way that could be understood and experimented with by others. So then the logic comes in, the logic and the reasoning, how to express this in this very precise language of mathematics as an equation. So, but the insight that led to that definition of the two states of energy, the two states of being, actually. E, energy, equals m, matter, times the speed of light squared, which is an inconceivable number. So, and this led to the thinking that, in practical terms, led to the thinking that brought scientists to the idea of critical mass in radioactive materials and led to atom bombs and then to thermonuclear bombs. So all of this comes, it expands, but it expands from these dramatic insights, a new way of thinking or seeing. So yes, you're right, Balakrishna. That's what the Swami was driving at. Anything else from anyone?
So, Brother Shankara, I'm supposing that the surrender itself cannot happen if the scientist or one is still entangled in the logical thinking. So they have to be, like he says, that taking a walk in the woods or going on a beach. So basically, kind of like clearing the mind, if you will. Is that when that um, turn happens or that intuition comes in?
It seems to be. That's what the fellow who wrote Tao of Physics was pointing out, that it is, but without the prior work, without the intellectual effort and the rigorous thinking that goes into it ahead of time. This is what the Swami is going to get at in the spiritual realm now. Divine grace happens to those who have made the effort to do the intellectual and psychic work to prepare themselves. It's not a guarantee that it will happen, but the assertion is in the spiritual traditions that without the preparation, it can't happen. Simply self-surrender, because, as the Swami pointed out early in the book, you have to have something to surrender. You have to have something that you have to have done some work of fulfillment on the lesser plane, the plane of lesser truth, before there's this breakthrough into higher truth. That's what he's calling the breakthrough is divine grace. So thank you, Swayam. Anything else from anyone? All right, please read on, dear.
Okay. Section 22, Philosophy of non-effort versus creativity. Vedanta discerns a close spiritual kinship between the philosophies of non-effort and the science of human creativity on the one side and divine grace on the other. They all point to some profound dimension within man himself, beyond the rigid cause and effect mechanism, and do not involve the invoking of any unscientific, extra-cosmic, and supernatural source. But the way of thinking that produces a scientific intuition and the great products of creativity need not be located in the subconscious of modern Western psychology, as is done in the passage quoted above, says Vedanta, but in a superconscious dimension of the human mind. Vedanta recognizes a superconscious level of cognition, besides the conscious, the preconscious, subconscious, and the unconscious. This is also hinted in the recent studies of cognition with reference to human creativity by several Western psychologists. In his studies of creativity and its cultivation, Silvano Arietti says, by the term creative process, the present author means a special process by which man tries to transcend in a desirable way the usual psychological formula of stimulus response. Although there is a fundamental difference between the infrahuman animal, which has a limited number of responses, and the symbol making human being, man too tends to respond in fixed ways. Whether his response occurs immediately after the stimulus or whether it follows a complicated set of symbols and choices, man tends to react in accordance with a repertory of responses provided by his usual psychological faculties or by ways which have become common style of his culture. If his responses are mediated by cognitive processes, they generally follow what in Freudian psychoanalysis has been called the secondary process, and in more general parlance, Aristotelian or ordinary logical thinking.
Yes, and this is the product of our samskaras and the influence of the gunas on our samskaras. And so we have this predictable way of being that it's these common understandings that are together make up our culture. Our culture is a very complex set of common agreements and understandings about what is true, what is not true, how to behave, how not to behave, and so on. Beyond that, there are samskaras, or as Jill Bolte Taylor calls them, neural loops, that when acted upon, when stimulated, produce a characteristic and predictable response. Any comments or questions about that?
Um, Brother Shankara, you were mentioning earlier about how um, there's some, and don't remember your exact words, but even in this field of human interactions, there have to be some new
Insights.
insights. So one of the thing that I'm thinking is a lot of the friction is because there is so much misperception of one culture about the other due to, again, limited um, interaction, limited knowledge. And when one gets over that, like by meeting and actually mingling with other cultures, then it tends to cause lead to more understanding.
Yes. But this is very hard to do when the other culture, which may be within our own culture, two sets, at least two sets of ways of thinking and being, when they are antagonistic with one another. It's very hard to have a conversation with someone who has been trained, literally been trained, to be antagonistic to you, thinking that you are somehow an enemy person. It is, and it isn't just one side or the other that has done this. The demonization of the other is this created this huge social divide in this country that is at this point unbridgeable. At least it seems to be. One of the people you can listen to who thinks and writes and so on about this extensively is a man named Charles Eisenstein. Charles Eisenstein. So I'm not saying you should listen to him, but what he says is very interesting about the state of our society and the need for this breakthrough thinking. That's exactly what his thesis is that there must be a kind of breakthrough thinking that somehow allows us to see our common humanity and our common plight, rather than two camps firmly antagonistic toward one another. Thank you, Swami, for bringing that into focus. Anything else?
Well, I also think this one, because in the first para itself, the Vedantic philosophy of non-effort and science of human creativity on one side and divine grace on the other. So what exactly is, I think, because when Vedanta recognizes a superconscious level of cognition, that means it is what our rishis used to say, used to get the shruti, that is, when they are in deep meditation state, these are all revealed to them. In the same way, I think the Swami is talking about when they go into that superconscious level, that's almost like a nirvikalpa samadhi.
Well, it is a kind of samadhi, and it is called turiya, the fourth.
Yes. And that is where they get all these creative powers and all those things. That's what I gather from the statement.
But it doesn't have anything to do with those things, the creative powers and their insights, yes. But it's not the same thing that Patanjali is talking about in chapter 3 of the Yoga Sutras. Those are psychic powers. Those are they are part of the third mind. The latent, getting access to the latent subconscious or unconscious state, where these occult powers or
yes.
Psychic powers come from. But it's not the same thing at all as what's being talked about in this superconscious state or the state of divine grace.
Yes. That is where that's what I'm, because he specifically says, the Vedanta recognizes superconscious level of cognition besides the conscious, pre-conscious, subconscious, and unconscious states.
Yes.
Most of these occult powers, they come in the, either subconscious or pre-conscious level, but not in the superconscious. When they go into superconscious, they are already transcending the matter,
Yes, well, turiya is by definition a kind of a form of samadhi.
Yes.
To be in that superconscious state is by definition a kind of samadhi. Anything else? Thank you, Bala. Anything else from anyone? All right, dears, let's read on.
The creative process allows man to liberate himself from the fetters of these secondary process responses. But creativity is not simply originality and freedom. It is much more than that. It also imposes restrictions. First of all, although it uses methods other than the secondary process, it must not be in disagreement with the secondary process.
In other words, it must remain rational. It can't be irrational. Vivekananda points this out over and over.
Otherwise, the result would be bizarre, not creative. Secondly, it must attain an additional aim, the desirable enlargement of human experience, either aesthetic pleasure as in art or usefulness, understanding, and predictability as in science. Thirdly, the creative process tends to fulfill a longing or a search for a new object or for a state of experience or existence which is not easily found or easily attainable. Side by side with this statement of the 20th century psychology, let us hear what Swami Vivekananda said at the end of the last century in the course of expounding the Vedantic view of the various planes of human consciousness. We see as human beings that all our knowledge, which is called rational, is referred to consciousness. At the same time, there is a very great part of my existence of which I am not conscious. When the food is manufactured into blood, it is done unconsciously. When out of the blood all the different parts of my body are strengthened, it is done unconsciously. And yet, it is I who am doing all this. How do I know that I do it and nobody else? Because it can be demonstrated that almost every action of which we are now unconscious can be brought up to the plane of consciousness. What does this show? That the functions which are beneath consciousness are also performed by us, only we are doing it unconsciously. We have then two planes in which the human mind works. First is the conscious plane, in which all work is always accompanied with the feelings of egoism. Next comes the unconscious plane, where all the work is unaccompanied by the feeling of egoism. There is a still higher plane upon which the mind can work. It can go beyond consciousness. Just as unconscious work is beneath consciousness, so there is another work which is above consciousness and which is also not accompanied with the feeling of egoism. The field of reason or of the conscious workings of the mind is narrow and limited. There is a little circle within which human reason must move. It cannot go beyond. Every attempt to go beyond is impossible. Yet it is beyond this circle of reason that there lies all that humanity holds most dear. All these questions, whether there is an immortal soul, whether there is a God, whether there is any supreme intelligence guiding this universe or not, are beyond the field of reason. Reason can never answer these questions. What does reason say? It says, I am an agnostic. I do not know either yea or nay. Yet, these questions are so important to us. Without a proper answer to them, human life would be purposeless. All our ethical theories, all our moral attitudes, all that is good and great in human nature have been molded upon answers that have come from beyond that circle. It is very important, therefore, that we should have answers to these questions. If life is only a short play, if the universe is only a fortuitous combination of atoms, then why should I do good to another? Why should there be mercy, justice, or fellow feeling? The best thing for the world would be to make hay while the sun shines, each man for himself. To get any reason out of the mass of incongruity we call human life, we have to transcend our reason. But we must do it scientifically, slowly, by regular practice, and we must cast off all superstition. We must take up the study of the superconscious state just as any other science. On reason, we must have to lay our foundation. We must follow reason as far as it leads. And when reason fails, reason itself will show us the way to the highest plane. When you hear a man say, "I'm inspired," and then talk irrationally, reject it. Why? Because these three states, instinct, reason, and superconsciousness, or the unconscious, conscious, and superconscious states, belong to one and the same mind. There are not three minds in one man, but one state of it develops into others. Instinct develops into reason, and reason into the transcendental consciousness. Therefore, not one of these states contradict the others. Real inspiration never contradicts reason, but fulfills it.
There we are. There we have it. This is these insights of the rishis, the shruti, that which they heard. They don't contradict reason. There's much superstition has been built on them, but there is no superstition in the shruti. There is simply clear, reasonable expressions of this transcendental knowledge that they were given. Any comments or questions about these things? All right, dear, please read on.
Sorry, I lost my space.
Modern psychology.
Page 72nd paragraph.
Page 70.
Modern psych. It starts modern psychology.
Second para.
Page 70.
Second para, third para.
Got it. Sorry, I flipped back to a page because I was trying to read that. Modern psychology speaks of the knowledge derived from the preconscious states, or the non-logical type of knowledge, as primary cognition, and that derived from the conscious state, or the logical type of knowledge, as secondary cognition. To quote Silvano Arietti again, according to the present author, it is from an appropriate matching of secondary process mechanisms with those of the primary process that the creative process emerges. The author proposes the use of the expression tertiary process for this special combination. And after dealing with the different forms of the appropriate matching of the primary process with the secondary process to generate the creative process and its expressions in wit, humor, pun, parables, and poetry, the author proceeds to deal with its expression in science. In a by now classic work on creativity, the great French mathematician Poincaré described accurately the moments of creative illumination that he experienced. In the morning, following a sleepless night spent on working on a mathematical problem, without finding the wanted results, he entered a bus. At the moment he put his foot on the step, the idea came to him, apparently without any conscious effort, that the transformation he had used to define the Fuchsian functions were identical with those of non-Euclidean geometry. This sudden illumination was a breakthrough leading to a great expansion in the field of mathematics. Poincare described his subjective experiences extremely well, but he did not stress the fact that his creative insight consisted of seeing an identity between two previously reputed dissimilar transformation, the Fuchsian and the non-Euclidean. In the previous night, and for 14 days prior to that night, Poincare had accumulated facts. But accumulation of data is not creativity. Many people are able to accumulate facts. The creative leap occurs when observed facts are correlated. That is, when by perceiving a hereto unsuspected identity, a conjunctive path or a new order is discovered. Silvano Arrietty then gives a few suggestions for the cultivation of creativity. It is well known that creative people appear in particularly large numbers in certain periods of history in given geographical areas. This uneven distribution seems to indicate that special environmental circumstances and not exclusively biological factors determine the occurrence of creativity. Studies made independently by several authors have determined that highly intelligent persons are not necessarily highly creative. Although creative people are intelligent persons, an exceptionally high IQ is not a prerequisite for creativity. On the contrary, it may inhibit the inner resources of the individual because of too rigid self-criticism or too quick learning of what the cultural environment has to offer. We must add that a great ability to deduce according to the laws of logic and mathematics makes for disciplined thinkers, but not necessarily for creative people. The science of promoting creativity is in its initial stages. The author can suggest only rudimentary and tentative notions, deduced from his psychoanalytic psychotherapeutic treatment of a relatively large numbers of creative people. In the present chapter, we have seen how the use of primitive forms of cognition is a prerequisite for many forms of creativity. We certainly do not advocate a fostering of psychopathology for the enhancement of creativity. Some people have tried to do so pharmacologically by means of alcohol, opium derivatives, and more recently by lysergic acid diethylamide. These are methods that a psychiatrist cannot recommend. In addition to the danger of addiction, their value as promoters of creativity is more than doubtful. If it is true that they facilitate the re-emergence of the primary process, they impair the use of the secondary process, and we have seen that creativity or tertiary process emerges only by the harmonious matching of the two processes.
Hold on just one moment. If you remember, the guru for people such as Krishna Das and Ram Das, both Westerners, was Neem Karoli Baba. Ram Das had for many years, thinking that it promoted his creative and spiritual insights, had taken LSD. This was just pointed to, LSD. So he brought some to Neem Karoli Baba. He brought a a fairly large amount that he didn't expect anything to that it would all be taken at once. When he transferred it from his palm to Neem Karoli Baba's palm, Neem Karoli Baba popped the whole amount into his mouth. Ramdas thought, "Oh my God, I have killed my guru. No one can take this much LSD and live." Neem Karoli Baba, which was not unusual at all, simply rolled over on his side in his blanket and became unavailable. 6 hours later, he rolled back over, opened his eyes, and said, "That's interesting, but that's not it." And so this is exactly what's being pointed to as none of these things are the source of creativity. They may give you interesting insights, but the insights don't come to anything. Coleridge wrote a great poem about this. Anyway, without going off on too big a tangent, this is exactly what is being pointed to here. That what Neem Karoli Baba said. That's interesting, what it does to the mind, but that's not it. Any comments or questions from anyone about what's been read or what was just said?
Brother Shankara, is creativity stifled by consumerism and the profit motive? The reason I bring that up is I am reading the stories that in the ancient times, all these poets and different artists used to have the patronage of kings, so they didn't have to work and sell themselves, sell their art and creativity. Whereas nowadays it seems as if even those who are creative, the first thing they are told or they feel they ought to do is to make themselves marketable and successful in a business sense.
Well, it's interesting to compare the two personalities and careers of Bill Gates of Microsoft and Steve Jobs of Apple. Bill Gates, from the beginning, was all about organizing this organization that he founded to make lots of money. He wanted to make lots of money and be a real powerhouse in this emerging field. He really cared about all of these things. Steve Jobs did not care about money, did not care about, as a matter of fact, he did his best to avoid name and fame and the power associated with creating Apple, except within the organization. He, of course, was the final authority within the organization. But he was not motivated. If you read the biographies of these two men, you will find that Bill Gates was a crooked businessman right from the very beginning. Crooked and very, he took advantage of others and intimidated others. Steve Jobs said, "We're creating a situation where we control the situation, yes, but developers can work with us without fear that we're going to steal what they develop." And so it's interesting to what you just said, this commercial imperative. Bill Gates was driven by it. Steve Jobs created an organization that is now phenomenally successful. But that is not what he was interested in. He was interested in doing something unusual, something creative. His mantra was think different, not think differently, think different. Different from what is ordinary, different. And this was his challenge to his the creative people that worked with him at Apple. Think different. So that's my answer to your question, dear. Anything else from anyone about that?
One of the reasons that came to my mind was I was um, reading something or watching something on YouTube about the stand-up comedian who is now successful, but he was told by his father that um, that is the easiest way to become homeless. I mean, the father wanted him to go the usual route of.
Oh, yes. Who is this comedian?
I don't remember. It's a Chinese American, I think.
Yes. Oh, yes. I know who you mean, but I can't think of his name either. And of course, this is absolutely the fact among so many parents. They will tell their children, "Oh, don't follow your creative muse. Stick to the straight and narrow. Become prosperous, and then late in life you can indulge in these things when you're retired." And of course, that's folly. By the time you've gotten that far along in life, your habits are so fixed that it is virtually impossible to overcome all of the limitation and narrowness that have caused you to be a commercial success. Anything else from anyone?
So after Ram Dass's experience with his guru, what did he say about LSD? Did he continue to use it, or he
No,
said no?
he stopped entirely.
Stopped completely. Okay.
He never used it again because his teacher was trying to teach him something else, and he now could see that this is what his teacher had been trying to teach him all along. There's another way. But his teacher never condemned what he did. He didn't condemn it when he gave it to him and he took it. He simply said, "This is interesting, but it's not, that's not it." So then, of course, Ram Dass and others became interested in what is it. And if you want to hear what it is, listen to the chants of Krishna Das. I mean, if you listen to the chants of Krishna Das and go along with him for all the long, what he does with his bhajans, with his chants, you will go into an altered state yourself, but not by anything other than the influence of those of Shabda Brahman in the form of sound, in his chanting. And of course, Ram Dass, there's another story about him, the film Fierce Grace. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in Ram Dass. Fierce Grace. Anything else from anyone?
What is the name of the film, Shankaraji?
Fierce, F-I-E-R-C,
Oh.
Fierce Grace.
Oh.
It's about the fact that Ram Dass had been going along very self-satisfiedly, you could say even egoistically, thinking of himself as a great spiritual teacher. Then he had a stroke. And in the midst of the stroke, it occurred to him, all I've been thinking about is how terrible this is, what I'm about to lose, that I might die. I haven't any of all of those things that Krishna says to be thinking about when you pass from the body. Not one of them had occurred to him. he was thinking only about the functions that he was probably going to lose, or that in the worst case, from his perspective at that point, that he would die. He saw then, he came to see later, that that stroke was a gift from the divine, fierce grace. What is grace? An outward manifestation of the divinity within. And so he came to see that, and he transformed himself. And this film is about the later transformation. He did not make the film. The film was made by, I believe, one of his disciples, but I'm not even certain about that. In any event, it's a really beautiful film about this business of what it is we train ourselves to do. All right, it is 8:26. Do you want to read on a little bit, Swam? And
Sure.
the idea that we'll recapitulate it again next week, whatever you read, we won't really have time to discuss it. So,
Yes, we can do that.
and then we'll go over it again next week.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
Instead of resorting to toxic procedures, we must consider and possibly recommend special attitudes, habits, and environmental conditions. The first condition to be considered is aloneness. Aloneness may be viewed as a partial sensory deprivation. He has more possibility of listening to his inner self, to come in contact with his inner resources and with some manifestations of the primary process. Unfortunately, aloneness is not advocated in our modern forms of educating adolescents. On the contrary, gregariousness and popularity are held in high esteem. Aloneness should not be confused with painful loneliness or with withdrawal or constant solitude. A second characteristic which seems to promote creativity is one which is contrary to the present spirit of American culture: inactivity. By inactivity, of course, we do not mean schizophrenic withdrawal or catatonic immobility or excessive loafing, but the allowing of periods of time during which the person is permitted to do nothing at an overt behavior level. If a person must always focus his attention on external work, he decreases the possibility of expanding his inner resources. Here again, American upbringing promotes an opposite attitude. Excessive routine activities stifle mental activity and creativity. The third characteristic is daydreaming. It is in daydream life that the individual permits himself to diverge from the usual ways and to make little excursions into irrational worlds. Another requirement for the creative person is even more difficult to accept: gullibility. This word is used here to mean the willingness to accept, at least temporarily or until proved wrong, that there are certain underlying orderly arrangements in everything outside us and inside us. Creativity often implies the discovery of these underlying orderly arrangements more than the inventing of new things. I'll just finish this one more paragraph, then we'll finish 22 section.
Well,
It's
but-
8:30 though.
yeah, it's 8:30. Let's leave it there, dear.
Okay.
You can just simply start this that you just read
Okay.
from the beginning of that started
Aloneness.
next week.
Okay.
Any comments or questions from anyone?
It's amazing. The Swami is trying to prove everything, the spirituality, into the scientific language.
Well, he's dealing with a bunch of people here at this Shivananda ashrama in Perth, Australia, who are very definitely a part of that kind of culture.
Yes.
And so he's trying to relate to them. He's trying to speak to the audience he's speaking to. And of
Yes.
course, he's trying to alert them to the fact that there's more to life than what they have been experiencing. And that's his role is to be an awakener, a guru, a remover of darkness. And so this business of aloneness, you've often heard me speak of my late wife, Marjorie, who was a very great creative success. One of her phrases that she liked was, alone in good company. Alone in good company. And of course, anyone who pursues a spiritual path is definitely must cultivate this joy in aloneness, of being alone in good company. All
I
right.
like that paragraph, Brother Shankara, aloneness paragraph.
Yes, I did too.
It's so true, so true. People think they get the misunderstanding of aloneness with loneliness.
Oh, yeah.
Aloneness is different. It is so true. It's not advocated much. A lot of times, oh, are you going to be alone? We had this conversation with my son this Thanksgiving Day. Somebody was going to be alone. They didn't have any place to go. He said he would invite. I was hosting the lunch. And then he said, okay, invite. And then that person didn't show up. I asked him what happened. Well, that person wanted to stay by themselves. I said, it's great. Being alone is wonderful. Why are you worried about that person? So I have stayed alone and I love it. It's just, you go deep into yourself.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
internal. It's internal.
Exactly.
We had that conversation on Thanksgiving Day about aloneness, and
Well,
it's wonderful. It's
yes,
wonderful.
it is. It is. If you overemphasize it, like anything, it becomes you're using it to avoid rather than encourage. So that's why he said it's not meant
He
as.
said it very correctly. Yeah, he stated it really right.
We'll hear it again next week.
Sure. Thank you.
Right, dears. Om Hari Om. Om Hari Om. Om Hari Om. Oh, but dearly beloved, a flower at your feet for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet for each one who stands by your open door and says, come to me, offering to break this world's chain that binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this, your jungle world. Om, Amen. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace and beneficence be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga Durga Durga. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. and may we be always in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. That's it from here. Any final thought from anyone? All right, dears.
Steve Jobs is also more spiritual. He used to walk almost like 2 miles or 3 miles to a Buddhist temple to get his lunch.
Very good. Yeah, well, he as I say, he was, though he created this incredible
Yes,
company, his motivation was not money or name and fame.
yes, yes.
It was not a commercial motive. It was a desire to be creative, to use these tools and processes that were coming online to, and if you want to see the very first real breakthrough on this, just take a look at the Mac Plus computer, that little rectangular small screen, but it was it was actually portable. You could take it from work home and so on and so forth, and it had incredible capabilities, but it was entirely different than anything that had ever been created before, and it was created for creative people. So the art director, the graphic designer that worked with me at the time, David Goodnick, he just had more fun with that machine than the law allows. This was 1985. 1985. The Mac Plus and PageMaker 1.2. So, dears,
PageMaker I fell in love with
yeah,
when I had my first little Macintosh,
yeah,
and I
absolutely,
made up a little newspaper for myself and
yeah,
shared it with a few friends.
yeah,
And I was, but the first week I had the machine, all I did was create little envelopes and little folders and name them because I was
wonderful.
scared of the machine.
Ah, well, dear, we get over our fears. All right, dears,
I hope you feel better,
until
Brother Shankara.
until next time, our first face-to-face gathering as a congregation will be on Holy Mother's birthday, which will be celebrated on December 18th. Her birthday is actually December 15th. The Sunday following that is December 18th. And either we will have a pujari, Aditya Chaturvedi will be out of the country. He'll be in India doing research for his dissertation. But I'm going to ask Dr. Majmudar if he can do it, and if he can't, well, then we'll see what else can be done. If it comes to that, we'll just have a nice informal worship of Mother, not a tantric one. So until next time, dears, much love and good night.